I am thrilled today for our guest and our conversation as we continue this series on Black resistance and mental health. And as you know, I am really interested and invested in talking about bringing topics that typically don't get covered in the mental health sphere. And so today our conversation is about Black people in tech and that intersection with mental health. I'm excited to introduce our guest today, Olivia. We're going to have her say a little bit about who she is, and you're going to be just as excited as I am to have this conversation with her. So, Olivia, tell us a little bit about who you are, what you do, and why it is important for us to have this conversation about mental health, tech, and the Black community today.
Thank you so much, Dr. Jackman, and so glad to have this conversation with you today. I think this is super relevant for all the things that are happening in the world. So, Olivia Fowora here. I am a technical program manager at Google, but have spent the last 10 years working in various kind of governance, compliance, security, and privacy areas within technology, within government, within law firms as well. Essentially, have been able to really kind of bridge the gap for quite a few industries as it relates to technology. And certainly this conversation that you've mentioned of mental health and tech is pertinent for me across those experiences that I've had, really more so as it relates to kind of prioritizing my own mental health to ensure that I'm bringing my best self to the work that I do every single day, but also how I can advocate for further kind of importance of mental health in the technology companies that I've worked for. Dr. Jackman, you and I met when I was at a previous company, Vimeo, as well, and there I functioned as a lead for an employee resource group, and really prioritized kind of ensuring that the intersectional nature of mental health for especially Black individuals, or people of color in general that work in technology, is prioritized, because there is, as you and I both know, I think certain barriers to mental health advocacy as well as resources. And I think that a lot of technology companies provide resources that are not tapped into by BIPOC communities when they are working, because there is, of course, in our community, the conversations about having to work twice as hard for a lot of the same opportunities. And so that takes away from the time that an individual would dedicate to mental health. So for me, it's really important to want to advocate for that engagement, utilizing the resources that these technology companies provide, but also kind of making sure that conversation is happening across the industry, and then I'm connecting with others that look like me at other technology companies to say this is something that we do need to prioritize, and as well as making sure that folks are taking time for themselves. So again, really glad to speak with you today, and again, this is something that I'm super passionate about, so I'm really glad that you've brought this conversation to the forefront.
Absolutely. And thank you for being willing to do this. As you mentioned, it doesn't get talked about quite, enough. So you cover tech, you've done in governance, you have the legal pieces. Man, you have covered a wide range. So that gives you a really great bird's eye view as well, in terms of just industries. You've worked in different industries as well. So, I want to take a little step back because we know that the tech industry is pretty homogenous, and we know that Black people, women, often are not seen in these fields, and definitely not in leadership positions. Um, and then you have the intersectional identity as a Black woman. So, what drove you? What motivated you? What led you to pursue a career in tech and to stay in tech? I don't know if that was the thing that you dreamed about, but I'm curious, like, what got you there and what is keeping you there?
Yeah, thank you for that. I think it has been a journey, if you will, to kind of transition into this space. And I think what the thread that's kind of consistent throughout all of these experiences for me prior to tech and now in tech has always been my interest in continuing to learn and be at
Mhm.
the forefront of innovation. So when I was a kid, all of the individuals that I looked up to were the first Black woman in NASA, the first Black woman engineer. Those types of individuals kind of were so inspiring for me to see, um, and it felt as though there was such an incredible perspective that could be seen from those individuals in those positions. And I
Yes.
felt that being able to be a part of technology felt like the next frontier, felt like the next step as black women continue to progress in these areas and be the first of something that continuing into to that vein would be something that would be in further into that. So that was kind of what led me to this space, and what's kept me is really the fact that I think technology organizations definitely provide benefits and resources that are incredible in the space of mental health, but health in general, right? So I think two areas, both health as well as professional development, are again harder for BIPOC individuals to access, and mental health resources and health resources in general are value adds essentially to do it. Recruit top talent. Technology companies are looking to have the best healthcare services, the best mental health services that are available, and those things also attracted me to stay in tech, right? Because leaving this industry, you do lose those benefits. And of course, the learnings. I like to describe myself as a forever student in the sense that I'm always looking to learn more. And I really appreciate the fact that there is no one who can be an expert in a given technology area because there's always more to know. And so that is another reason why I've stayed among many, because I think that it is a space that allows for a continuation of learning in a given area. And you can really dig into to rabbit holes for long periods of time, which is a lot of fun as well.
Yeah, that's for sure, right? Particularly on the other end as a consumer. So I can just imagine what it is working behind the scenes. And so you talk about just kind of your early inspirations that got you into the STEM field and thinking about technology. And I love the description, thinking about it as like the next frontier, right? And you're right. It's ever evolving, it's ever changing. And I could see I'm similar, I'm always learning. So I could see how that can be really exciting to like, oh, let me get up to speed with this next thing. How do I, it's kind, kind of continuing to be disruptive in your thinking about the world as well. And I know this conversation is not about ethics per se, but that's definitely like, ooh, like, because there's a lot of questions that we're even considering. We think about mental health equity in tech, but that's another conversation for another day.
Absolutely. Another great conversation that we'll have to have soon.
Okay. So, what are some of the top concerns you think facing Black employees in the tech space?
Yeah. So for me, I think it's two things. One is equity.
Mm-hmm.
Um, I think ultimately we as a society have work to do in ensuring that the wage gaps, the opportunity gaps that exist
Mm-hmm.
for individuals based on race as well as gender are addressed. And I think that that's reflected in technology as well.
Right.
So equity for me is definitely, I think, a major issue that it persists as a Black person in tech, but also I think creating that work-life balance for mental health. Those are the two that I would say are most critical issues that I see change with. But I do think that there is still a great need for conversations to be had about these areas. And I think there's more work to be done
Mm-hmm.
in the technology space to ensure alignment for these areas. So, as it
Mm-hmm.
relates to the equity side of things, I really think that's more so making sure that you understand your worth, right? And what the industry and what the market is. One of
Mm-hmm.
the greatest gifts that I ever received was really the understandings about transparency in compensation, as well as in benefits and opportunities that are offered. Right, I had a really great colleague that I worked with a few years back that shared with me when we both started the same role what their salary was. And it was invaluable information because
Mm-hmm.
it demonstrated that there was a gap
Mm-hmm.
and a lack of equity in
Right.
terms of the compensation that existed there. And those types of conversations can be extremely pivotal. So to me, I think it's kind of one, asking those tougher questions, having those tougher conversations in the equity space, and the same thing in mental health, right? I think that there's often this worry about saying, hey, I'm feeling overwhelmed, I'm feeling
Mhm.
there's a lot
Mhm.
going on, and I'm not sure if I'm going to be able to handle it all,
Mhm.
especially among Black people, especially among Black women. But I think it's important to be honest. The other thing that I've started to do as it relates to tackling this issue is saying,
Mhm.
hey, when someone says how are you, it doesn't always have to be I'm great, I'm okay.
Yeah.
It's
Yeah.
okay not to be okay. And I think those types of honest conversations, especially for individuals that you've developed and networked relationships with within the organization, can help
Mhm.
to bring this conversation to the forefront.
Right.
So I think there's a lot of room for growth and opportunity in these two areas, especially in technology. But I think that those conversations can
Yeah.
happen, and I don't think it has to be a panel or a conference that change to occur. It's
Mhm.
those little things of how
Mhm.
you start a meeting, asking how an
Mhm.
individual's weekend was, seeing how they
Mhm.
are outside of their work. I recently had a really great meeting with one of the leaders within Google that is Black, and I shared all these things about myself, my work, my previous working experience. Um, and they said, but what about you? What do you like to do? Who are you as a person? And I think
Mm.
that gets lost often
Yes.
in working environments, especially as Black women. We say we're so goal oriented, we're so
Yeah.
focused on the
Yeah.
outcomes that those conversations get lost. And so for me,
Mhm.
that day to day, hey, check in with yourself and make sure that you're checking
Yeah.
in with others from a personal standpoint, because it can be invaluable in making sure that this mental health conversation continues.
Yeah. Well, that's great because it's a great lead into this question. So, and you've kind of hinted at it, but so in general, and I know you can't speak for everybody or every industry, or every segment of the industry, but how are people seeing mental health? Is it, do people talk? I mean, you kind of talk about this person who kind of stopped you and say, hey, I don't want your resume. I want to learn about you. But in this very, I think we're also in this time where the tech industry, there's a lot of scrutiny. There's a lot of financial stress, lots of layoffs, and companies closing. So I can imagine that people are feeling increased amounts of stress,
Mm.
and you don't want to show any sign of weakness because you might feel like you might be picked off if you do. So even prior to where we're at with the current climate around tech, how do people view technology, and how has that shifted in this post pandemic where we're navigating these really challenging financial times?
Absolutely. I think it's interesting. There's a few different, I think, tools that have made this conversation easier to have and more
Mhm.
effective. One
Mhm.
is, I think that industry wise, we are heading to a world where computers help us to do the things that we don't want to do, the tougher things, right? Like helping us to write things, helping us to
Mhm.
code things, helping us to do our budgets. The AI is going to be the future in that sense, that it gives us more opportunity for
Mhm.
creating a work life balance,
Mhm.
for being able to pursue therapy, pursue, whatever wellness practices are necessary for us in terms of creating that balance for ourselves. So I
Mhm.
think if you're an individual who's uncomfortable with kind of like pushing the conversation, at least leveraging the technological resources that exist to allow for more time for yourself so that your
Yeah.
mental health can be prioritized is step one. I would say
Mhm.
step two, like I mentioned earlier, kind of really leveraging a lot of those benefits and resources that you have internally. So I know what the organizations that I've worked at so far, they have offered, psychiatric resources, therapy resources, of course, healthcare services as well. All of those things, kind of making sure that you're prioritizing your health overall, thinking about the concept of mental health as
Mhm.
health. I think that in America and a lot of countries that there is this disconnect between physical versus mental health.
Mhm.
They are the same and should be prioritized accordingly. And then third, I would say, there's definitely a lot of resources within organizations outside of benefits, whether it be wellness groups or clubs. I'm a part of quite a few in terms of doing yoga stretches in the morning, breathing exercises, essentially kind of leveraging some of the community-based initiatives that exist, so that you can find who your people are, right? Because I'm always looking for my people, and my wellness, healing, mental health focused people. They
Mhm.
exist in all the organizations that I've worked at. And I think being able to find that camaraderie can be helpful, and having those conversations that you may be uncomfortable with, right?
Mhm.
Because maybe that's not something that you're comfortable saying with your team or with your manager, but in
Right.
those communities, in those spaces that have been designed for the organization,
Mhm.
you will find that. And if it doesn't exist, create it. Like I mentioned earlier as well, I was a founder of an resource group. Organizations love the concept of being able to have new employee resource groups come up based on an interest that you've identified. So if you
Mhm.
can't find your people, begin to through creating your own within an organization, whether or not it's a BIPOC focused wellness group,
Mhm.
or maybe just a meditation club,
Yeah.
whatever that looks like for you. Make sure that you're carving out that opportunity. Because it does exist. And I think that technology organizations kind of create that space naturally. But I don't think that it's just a tech thing that allows for that type of structure. I think in any industry that you work within, find your people. And I'll say it
Right.
again because I think
Right.
that that is a
Yeah.
really critical piece as well.
Yeah. And I think you emphasize the importance of taking that time. I think people sometimes, particularly in this environment, is like, oh, I don't have time for that. I don't have time for that. But it actually benefits you time at the other end, right? Because if you don't have time for it now, you're
Right.
gonna you're gonna have to make time for it later when you may need to invest more, take more time away, or to take care of your health, whether it's physical or mental health. I agree with you. They're all connected. That's kind of like what I say all the time, right? They're interconnected. And I think when we think about our communities, it's so often we have separated our physical health from our mental health. But we need to bring those and integrate those together. And finding spaces at work, I think work have also been places where we've experienced harm. So to think like I'm going to find my people at work, right? We're like, I don't want to be bothered with these people. I don't know what they're going to do, right? Like I feel like I hear those messages, but I really appreciate, particularly coming out of COVID, where we've been so disconnected from each other. Making those spaces and building back those communities at work, I think are really helpful. Because I need that person across the room when I can look at you and like you give you the eye, it's like you have to say one thing.
It's so true. It's so true. That connection is invaluable, and I think that has been tougher for me, to be honest. As I've been working, I moved from Vimeo to Google. That experience, finding my people again, has been
Mhm,
tougher. But I think it's important to explore. And like I mentioned, if there isn't an existing structure, an existing employee resource group or club,
mhm.
creating that space for yourself, even if it's just you sitting in a room meditating for 15 minutes, and other folks decide to join. Again, that will help you to kind of create the space in the working environment, and you'll
Mhm.
you'll be amazed at how your team, your manager, and others that you work with support you in carving out that space for yourself.
Yeah, yeah. Oh, that's great because I think that is a really great. Sometimes I think we make up the stories, right? There's no time, they're not going to support it, but you have to ask for it.
and
Uh,
and and it also will help you with your performance reviews, right? Because it
mhm.
demonstrates that you have the ability to establish something from nothing, that you are
Right.
able to create a balance for yourself, that you're being
Mhm.
able to manage the workload,
Yeah.
because you have time for this. So I think it also shows your time management skills as well.
Awesome, awesome. Anything else you want to say before we close out? Maybe a word of inspiration or encouragement for people who might be thinking about stepping their toe into the mental health, into the tech field, or someone who's new to the industry? Any words of wisdom that you want to share as we close out today?
Absolutely do it. Don't be afraid. So I mentioned I've worked in a lot of different places. I've worked at debt collection
Mhm.
companies. I've worked at state agencies. Really, I think don't be afraid of technology because you don't know how to code. I don't know
Mhm.
how to code. I think it's really important for individuals to understand that there are a lot of opportunities in this space. To not be afraid. I like to think about technology being a space that allows you to ask questions and to continue to learn. So if you're someone who likes learning, this is the
Mhm.
space for you. And I would just say don't be afraid of it, because there's no such thing as a dumb question in this space. There's no such thing as you don't know, so you can't be involved.
Mhm.
Continue to want to know, and that's really all you need to be successful. Is my take there. And then as it relates to mental health in this space, I definitely would say that don't feel like you have to separate the two. I think that there
Mhm.
is space for your mental health, because the more you prioritize your health overall, the better
Mhm.
work product you can provide to the organization. So do keep that in mind as well. I've mentioned I'm an advocate for this work, but I also truly believe that
Mhm.
mental health, it drives your overall health. And so I think that prioritizing this work for yourself can be so beneficial. I have a therapist, and I'm definitely very passionate about keeping up with all of my doctor's visits. And I definitely want to encourage folks to do the same, because I think they're all very much interconnected.
Excellent. Well, on that note, as she said, get a therapist, right? Take care of your mental health. So thank you for being an ambassador, an advocate, because I love that. And so I think thank you again, Olivia, for joining us for this conversation on Black resistance and mental health with a special focus on the tech industry. So stay tuned as we continue these really important conversations.
Thank
Take
you,
care.
Dr. Jackman. It's been such a pleasure.
Thank you.